I thought I was just going to spend a quiet week by the water. I thought I was going to sit on the porch, drink my coffee, and watch the waves come in the way they always did, slow and steady and indifferent to everything a man carries inside him. I hadn't been back to the beach house in almost 8 months, and I missed it the way you miss something that used to hold your whole life together. I had no idea that 1 week would change everything between me and my son forever. But if you stay with me until the end, you'll understand why the moment he looked me in the eye and said what he said, I didn't raise my voice, didn't argue, didn't do a single thing he expected. I just reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out my phone, and made one quiet call. What happened after that call, I will never forget for the rest of my life. My name is Richard. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a structural engineer, and I built a good life, not a flashy one. Not the kind you brag about at dinner parties, but the kind that's solid. The kind where the foundation holds even when the weather turns ugly. My wife, Carol, was the heart of everything we built together. She passed 4 years ago from pancreatic cancer, 11 weeks from diagnosis to goodbye. I still haven't fully made peace with how fast it happened. The beach house on the South Carolina coast was Carol's idea. We bought it 22 years ago when the boys were young, when Dylan was 12 and his younger brother Marcus was 8. It was a white clapboard house with green shutters, 3 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, and a path through the seagrass that led straight down to the water. Carol called it our reset button. Every summer we went there. Every Thanksgiving for the last decade of her life. When she got sick, we went there too, and she sat on that porch with a blanket across her lap and watched the pelicans fly in formation over the inlet and said, "Richard, promise me you'll keep this place." I promised her. And I kept that promise. After Carol died, I threw myself into work for another 2 years before finally retiring. Marcus is settled, now lives in Denver with his wife and 2 kids, works in logistics, calls me every Sunday without fail. He's the quiet kind of good, my younger son, the kind you don't worry about. Dylan is different. Dylan has always been different. He's 36 now, and he's never quite landed. Moved from city to city in his 20s, changed jobs the way other people change television channels. Smart enough to get into rooms that impress people, but never quite disciplined enough to stay in them. I told myself it was just his nature, that some people bloom later. Carol used to say, "Give him time, Richard. He just needs more runway." So I gave him time, and when time wasn't enough, I gave him money. Over the years, I had paid for 2 rounds of rent when he fell behind, co-signed a car loan he swore he'd handle himself, fronted him $11,000 when a business idea collapsed before it ever really started, and for the past 2 years, I had been sending him $3,000 a month to help cover living expenses while he got back on his feet. That was $72,000 over 2 years, on top of everything before it. I want you to understand that number because it matters to what comes later. I wasn't a man who gave carelessly. I gave because I believed in him, and because I had promised Carol I would look after our boys. 8 months ago, I was deep in the middle of renovating the main bathroom at the beach house. I had contractors in and out, a new HVAC unit being installed, the kind of work that makes a place unlivable for stretches at a time. I stayed away longer than I planned. I checked in on the house through a security camera I had installed on the porch facing the driveway. Old habit from the engineer in me. I like to know the condition of things I own. But the camera had gone offline sometime in the spring, and I hadn't gotten around to troubleshooting it remotely. I should have paid more attention to that. In late October, I decided to drive down from Charlotte. No announcement, no plan. I just needed the water. I needed Carol's reset button. I loaded a bag, filled a thermos, and drove the 4 hours south with the radio off and the windows cracked. When I turned onto the sandy 2-lane road that leads to the house, I noticed cars I didn't recognize parked along the gravel pad beside the house. 3 of them, a late model Jeep, a silver sedan, and a pickup truck with a Georgia plate. I slowed down and told myself there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe the neighbors were using my driveway. Maybe someone had broken down. I parked on the grass verge and walked toward the house, and that's when I heard it: voices, music, the sound of people thoroughly at home somewhere. I came around the side of the house to the porch and stopped. There were 6 people on my wraparound porch, a man and woman who looked to be in their late 50s, 2 younger women, a teenage boy, and a man I recognized immediately. My son, Dylan. He was leaning against the porch railing with a drink in his hand, laughing at something the older man had said. He was dressed well, relaxed, the easy king of a domain that was not his. There were bags of groceries on the porch table, a cooler beside the door, beach chairs unfolded on the lawn. Someone had hung a set of wind chimes on the hook where Carol used to hang her sun hat. I stood there for a moment, just taking it in. The older man noticed me first. His expression shifted. He leaned toward Dylan and said something quietly. Dylan turned around. The moment he saw me, his face went through 3 emotions in about 2 seconds: shock, panic, and then something I had never seen on my son's face before. Something calculated. Something that made my stomach turn. He straightened up and said, "Can I help you?" "Not Dad, not Richard, not any version of recognition. Can I help you?" I looked at him steadily. "I think you know who I am, son." That word son landed like a stone. I watched him flinch almost imperceptibly. The older man on the porch stood up from his chair, curious, not unfriendly yet. Dylan took a step toward me, positioning himself between me and the porch, and he lowered his voice just enough that I understood this performance was entirely for the audience behind him. "Sir, I don't know who you are or why you're on my property, but I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "His property?" I breathed through it. I kept my voice even. "Is that right? We have guests here this weekend. This isn't a good time for whatever this is." The older man came down the porch steps then. He had a friendly, open face, the kind of man who smooths things over at parties. He extended his hand and said his name was Gerald, turned out to be Dylan's girlfriend, Amber's father, visiting from Atlanta with his wife, Amber's sister, and his nephew. Gerald said, "Hey, is everything all right? Are you a neighbor?" Before I could answer, Dylan said, "He's nobody, Gerald. Probably got turned around on the road. This property is private." He looked at me with a flatness in his eyes I had never seen before. "Like I said, you need to go. Nobody." I had written the down payment check for this house. I had stood in this driveway at 2 a.m. with a flashlight when the circuit breaker blew during a storm and Carol was scared. I had repainted these shutters 3 times. I had buried Carol's ashes in the seagrass garden she planted along the south side of this house on a gray November morning with Marcus and Dylan standing beside me. And my son was standing on my porch with my wind chimes above his head, telling a stranger I was nobody. "Dylan," I said quietly, "I want you to think very carefully right now." Something flashed across his face, but he had gone too far to step back gracefully in front of Amber's family, and whatever calculations he was running in his head, he chose the wrong answer. He crossed his arms and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I don't know what game you're playing, old man, but I built this life myself. Everything here, I earned this. So I'm going to say it one more time. Get off my property before I call the police." "Old man." Gerald looked uncomfortable now. Amber had come to the screen door. She was a pretty young woman with an anxious expression, and I could see from the way she looked at Dylan that she genuinely did not know what was happening. She had believed whatever story he told her. She had brought her whole family here on the strength of a lie my son had constructed with great care and no conscience. I looked at Dylan for a long moment. He held my gaze. He thought he had won. I reached into my jacket pocket and took out my phone. "You go right ahead and call whoever you'd like," I said. "I'll do the same." I walked back around to the driveway. I sat in my car, and I called my attorney, a man named Howard Bench, who had handled our family's legal matters for 15 years, and who answered on the 3rd ring. "Howard," I said, "I need you to pull the deed on the South Carolina property and tell me what steps I need to take to issue a formal notice of trespass and immediate vacate order." Howard was quiet for exactly 1 second. Then he said, "Richard, are you serious?" "I've never been more serious in my life. I'll have the paperwork started before end of day. You'll want to have the local sheriff's department serve it. Do you want me to make that call?" "Please." Then I made a second call, to the bank where I had been sending Dylan's $3,000 a month for 2 years. I asked them to cancel the recurring transfer effective immediately. The woman on the phone confirmed it with a reference number. I wrote the number down in the small notebook I keep in my glove compartment, the same kind of notebook I've used since my engineering days, because I believe in writing things down, in keeping records, in making sure that what you've decided actually exists somewhere permanent. Then I sat there in my car for a while. I'm not going to tell you I felt righteous. I'm not going to tell you anger was carrying me. What I felt, if I'm honest, was grief, the particular grief of a parent who realizes that the child they raised and loved and worried over has become someone they don't recognize. Someone who looked at his own father and chose the lie so smoothly it almost looked like the truth. I thought about Carol. I thought about what she would have said, and I knew, somewhere in the still quiet part of me, that she would have been heartbroken, but she also would have told me that enabling a man to avoid his own life is not love. It is fear wearing love's clothing. I got out of the car. Dylan was standing at the corner of the house. Amber and her family were somewhere behind him, but he'd come to find me alone. His confident posture from 20 minutes ago was gone. He looked like what he was, a man who had just begun to understand the situation he was actually in. Dad. It was the first time he'd used the word. Dad, listen, I can explain. I know you can, I said. You're very good at explaining. You always have been. It's not what it looks like. Amber, her family is really important to her. And she had this idea that, look, she wanted to see the place before the wedding, and I just thought, before the wedding, I repeated. He pushed a hand through his hair. We're engaged. I was going to tell you. Were you going to tell her that you don't own this house? He didn't answer. Were you going to tell her that the $3,000 a month she thinks you earn from your consulting business, that's your father's money? Were you going to tell her that? The color left his face the way I imagine it leaves the sky before a bad storm. He genuinely had not known how far I could see. Dylan, I kept my voice steady. Howard Bench will be filing the notice today. You'll receive the vacate order through the proper channels. But I'm telling you now, so there's no confusion, I need you and your guests off this property within 48 hours. The transfer to your account has also been canceled as of this afternoon. He stared at me. You can't. I can. It's my money. It was always my money. I should have been clearer about that much sooner, and that's a failure I own. But this ends today. Dad, please. His voice cracked, and for a moment he sounded like he was 12 years old. And that was the hardest moment of all. I have Amber's whole family here. You'll humiliate me. You'll ruin everything. I didn't ruin anything, son. You did. You've been ruining things very carefully for a long time, and I've been handing you the tools to do it. He was crying then. Real tears. And I believed they were real, not manipulative, but the tears of a man standing at the edge of something and finally feeling the height. I'll fix it, he said. I'll tell Amber the truth. I'll pay you back. Everything, just don't do this right now. Not like this. I looked at my son for a long time. I thought about every check I'd written, every call I'd answered, every time Carol had said, give him more runway. I thought about the wind chimes on my hook and the way he had looked at me and said, nobody. You have 48 hours, I said. I hope you use them well. I hope you tell Amber the truth before the paperwork arrives. Because if you don't, she'll find out from a legal document instead of from the man who says he loves her. That's up to you. I turned and walked back to my car. Where are you going? He called after me. To find a hotel. This is still my house, but I won't embarrass you in front of her family. I'm giving you that much. I opened the car door and looked back at him over the roof. Dylan, I love you. I have always loved you, but I am done being the reason you don't have to stand up. I drove down the sandy road and didn't look in the rearview mirror. I found a hotel 20 minutes up the coast. A decent place with an ocean view, and I sat on the balcony that night with a glass of bourbon and watched the same water I could see from Carol's porch. Different angle. Same ocean. I thought that was probably the right metaphor for where I was. Same love, different position. Howard called the following morning to confirm the notice had been filed. The sheriff's department would serve it the next day, if necessary. It wasn't necessary. Dylan called me at 10 o'clock that morning. He told me he had told Amber everything. The house, the money, all of it. He said she had asked her family to leave immediately. He said she hadn't decided yet whether to give him back the ring, and he was staying somewhere locally to give her space. His voice was hollow in a way I hadn't heard before, and I understood that he was experiencing, perhaps for the first time in his adult life, a consequence that no one was moving to soften for him. I told him I was glad he'd been honest with her. He asked if I had anything else to say. I said, when you're ready to talk about what comes next, not what you need from me, but what you're going to build yourself, I'm here. I'll always be here. But I'm not the foundation anymore, Dylan. You are. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I don't know how to do that. And I said, I know. That's partly my fault. But you're going to learn. Marcus called me that Sunday the way he always does. I told him what happened. He was quiet the way he gets when something lands heavy. And then he said, Dad, you should have done this 3 years ago. I told him I know that now. He said, How are you? And I told him the truth. I said I was sad, and I was also, underneath the sadness, something close to free. That surprised me when I heard myself say it, but it was true. I went back to the beach house 2 weeks later. I repaired the security camera. I repainted the front steps, which had started to peel. I hung Carol's sun hat back on the hook where the wind chimes had been, because whoever had put those up had not asked permission, and I was not sentimental about them. I sat on the porch on my first morning back and drank my coffee and watched the pelicans fly in that slow, unhurried formation over the inlet, and I understood something I think Carol tried to tell me and I wasn't ready to hear. You cannot love someone into their own life. You can only love them and then step back far enough that there's actually room for them to stand. I had filled every inch of Dylan's space with my money, my solutions, my rescue operations. There was no room for him to fail because I kept catching him. There was no room for him to grow because I kept smoothing the ground ahead of him. I thought I was building a safety net. What I had actually built was a cage, and I had upholstered it so nicely that neither of us noticed it was one. Dylan has been seeing a therapist since November. He told me that in a text message, not a call, which I think means he's still embarrassed and working up to more. I told him I was proud of him for that. I meant it completely. Amber gave him back the ring. He told me they're working through it, slowly. I don't know how it will go. I know that whatever she decides, she deserves the truth of who he actually is, not the version of himself he borrowed my assets to perform. And I know that if Dylan ever has a real life, a true life, it will be because he built it himself, one honest day at a time. Some people have told me I was too hard on him. A few people close to me shook their heads and said, Richard, he's your son, as if I needed the reminder, as if every single decision I made in that driveway wasn't being filtered through 36 years of watching that boy breathe. Being someone's father doesn't mean absorbing every consequence of their choices forever. It means loving them enough to let the consequences teach them what you couldn't. I know that now. I should have known it sooner, but I know it now, and I will carry that knowing like I carry Carol's memory, not as a wound, but as the thing that finally made me see clearly. The beach house is quiet this time of year. In the evenings, the light goes golden and flat across the water, and the seagrass along the south side of the house moves in the wind like something breathing. I sit on the porch and I think about the man my son might become when there's no one left to do it for him. And for the first time in a very long time, I find myself believing that man is possible. That's worth more than any check I ever wrote.